What if everything we call myth is actually misunderstood history? They taught you in school that dragons, giants, and sea monsters were just fairy tales, harmless stories meant to entertain or explain the unknown. But what if those ancient legends were based on real encounters? What if the terrifying beasts described by our ancestors weren't fiction, but forgotten fact? Across continents and millennia, cultures who never met described the same creatures: giant serpents, sky beasts, and underwater titans. How could people thousands of miles apart invent the same monsters? Coincidence, or a shared memory of something they actually saw? This isn't just a dive into mythology, it's an investigation. And the clues? They're hidden in fossils, old maps, sacred texts, and even modern-day sightings. We're talking about ancient mythological creatures that might have existed, and if even one of them turns out to be real, it could rewrite everything we think we know about history, evolution, and the world we live in. So if you're ready to question everything and explore what lies between legend and reality, stay with me. Were myths just misunderstood biology? Imagine stumbling upon a massive skull buried in the earth, its tusks curved like ancient swords, its eye sockets gaping like portals. Now picture being an ancient farmer or warrior with no concept of extinction, paleontology, or prehistoric life. What would you think you had found? To many, these discoveries weren't just bones. They were evidence, proof of monsters, of titans, of God's forgotten pets. What we now call mammoths, or mastodons, may have been the spark that ignited the fiery tales of cyclopes and giants, real, massive creatures that defied the understanding of early civilizations. Ancient people didn't have museums or microscopes, but they did have imagination, and they filled the gaps in knowledge with myth. A large femur found in the hills of Crete must have belonged to a giant. A curious skull with a central nasal cavity, definitely the one-eyed Cyclops. These stories weren't silly superstitions. They were sincere attempts to make sense of a mysterious world. What we see as fables may have been their version of science, and who's to say they weren't onto something? Take the island of Samos, for instance. Fossils of massive animals have been found there, yet the ancient Greeks believed the land was once home to monstrous beings of colossal power. When you compare the bones to the myth, the connection becomes uncanny. The line between ancient storytelling and early biology blurs fast. Maybe, just maybe, ancient mythological creatures that might have existed weren't fiction. They were fossils misunderstood. And then there's the desert, where nomads stumbled across enormous vertebrae half buried in the sand. To them, these weren't just bones. They were relics of dragon-like beasts or flying serpents. The legend of griffins, for example, gained traction near fossil sites of protoceratops in Central Asia. The beaked skulls, claws, and spines. It's not hard to see how a storyteller could spin a tale of gold-guarding monsters in the mountains. Again, biology meets mythology in a perfect storm of awe and wonder. But it's not just about the bones. They also found footprints. Massive impressions in stone, left by long-extinct creatures, would have looked like the marks of gods or beasts. Imagine seeing a three-toed print larger than your head. Wouldn't you assume a monster had passed through? Early humans likely didn't see dinosaurs as extinct. They saw them as hidden, sacred, or sleeping giants. Perhaps ancient mythological creatures that might have existed were never gone, just waiting to be remembered. And here's the thing. Even today, with all our technology and knowledge, we still find new species every year. Creatures we thought were extinct, like the coelacanth, suddenly reappear. So if we can still be surprised, why should we scoff at ancient cultures for interpreting strange bones as something legendary? Maybe the real question isn't, why did they believe that? Maybe it's, what are we still missing? Because the truth is, every myth starts somewhere, and it's often buried just beneath our feet. Who's to say that the creatures described in ancient epics were all fictional? Perhaps they were distorted echoes of a natural world far stranger than we dare admit. And if those myths began with bones and footprints, what happens when we look at other legends? Those based on things people claim to have seen. Real creatures behind the monsters. Let's play a game of imagination. Picture a world where every roaring lion, every slithering snake, and every soaring bird wasn't just an animal, but a messenger of the divine, or worse, a monster in disguise. That's how many ancient cultures saw the natural world. The line between animal and myth wasn't just thin, it barely existed. And it turns out, some of the most iconic beasts of mythology might have started as simple misunderstandings of real animals. Fascinating, right? We're stepping into a realm where biology became legend and ancient mythological creatures that might have existed walked the earth. Take the griffin, for example. Half eagle, half lion, and fully terrifying, or majestic, depending on the tale. For centuries, stories of these winged beasts were whispered along trade routes and carved into temples. But here's a twist. Their origin might lie in the fossilized remains of protoceratops, found near ancient gold mines in Mongolia. Think about it. A beaked skull, bird-like limbs, and a nest near treasure. Combine that with a little imagination and voila, the legend takes flight. Now let's dive underwater. The legend of the sea serpent has slithered through almost every maritime culture, from Norse sagas to Pacific Islander chants. Could these monsters have been inspired by sightings of real creatures like the oarfish? This deep-sea dweller can grow over 30 feet long and looks eerily similar to the serpents described by ancient sailors. In the dark depths of uncharted waters, seeing such a beast could feel like staring into the eyes of a god or a demon. Ancient, mythological creatures that might have existed might just be hiding in plain sight beneath the waves. And what about the Hydra? You know, the terrifying multi-headed serpent slain by Hercules? It sounds like pure fiction, until you consider the lamprey. This jawless fish, with its circular mouth lined with teeth, attaches to its prey and drains them dry. In swarms, they look like a writhing, head-splitting nightmare. Early accounts might have exaggerated a bit, sure, but the core fear was rooted in something real. The monstrous always begins as the misunderstood. Even the mighty dragon might trace back to creatures like the Nile crocodile. Fast, armored, aggressive, and terrifying to behold. Brought north by traders, these reptiles were sometimes kept as curiosities or used in rituals. Imagine a crocodile in medieval Europe. People wouldn't call it a reptile, they'd call it a monster. The way cultures wove these sightings into their stories reminds us just how thin the veil between reality and legend can be. Once again, ancient mythological creatures that might have existed appear not as fantasy, but distorted reflections of nature. It gets even weirder with things like the basilisk, said to kill with a single glance. Sure, it sounds extreme, but consider the king cobra. Its hooded stance and deadly venom might have fueled tales of instant death. Or the Komodo dragon. Its bacteria-laced bite was once thought to be magical poison. People didn't need to invent monsters from nothing. The natural world offered more than enough nightmare fuel. So what does all this tell us? Maybe our ancestors weren't just inventing monsters. They were interpreting reality through different lenses. Their myths, as bizarre as they may seem, were attempts to explain the strange, the dangerous, the unknown. And if so many of these legendary beasts have roots in actual animals, what does that say about the myths we've yet to decode? The global serpent, coincidence or memory? Here's something that'll twist your mind like a snake around a tree. Why did so many ancient cultures separated by oceans and centuries all worship or fear a massive serpent? From the feathered Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica to the endless Ouroboros in Egypt, the image of the serpent slithers through mythology like a universal thread. Coincidence? Maybe. But when ancient mythological creatures that might have existed appear across the globe with such consistency, one has to wonder, what were they all remembering? Let's start in South America. The Amazonian tribes speak of the Yakumama, the mother of water, a serpent so large it could swallow canoes whole. Locals claim to still hear her hiss echo through the jungle rivers. Now hop across the planet to Asia, where ancient Chinese scrolls depict the long, dragons with serpentine bodies, capable of shaping weather and fate. Strangely, these cultures never met, and yet their creatures share scale-like skin, fluid movement, and godlike presence. What's going on here? Could it be that our ancestors all witnessed something similar, something real, that slithered into their collective memory? Some theories suggest that giant anacondas or prehistoric serpents like Titanoboa might have survived longer than we think. Imagine encountering a 40-foot serpent deep in a jungle or cave, with no flashlight or camera to prove it. Wouldn't that sight live on in stories for generations? These ancient mythological creatures that might have existed may not just be metaphors, they might be memories. There's also the symbolism. Serpents often represent knowledge, chaos, rebirth. But why did so many civilizations assign the same meanings? The Norse Jormungandr encircles the world, just like the Hindu Sheshanaga supports the universe. These aren't just pretty stories, they're deeply rooted in cosmology. So is it just symbolic, or did these beings once exist in a way we can't quite explain? It's as if ancient people tried to tell us again and again that serpents weren't just animals, they were something else. And we can't forget North America. The Serpent Mound in Ohio, a massive earthen sculpture over 2,300 feet long, perfectly aligns with celestial events. Built by ancient cultures who left few written records, it raises the same question: why a serpent? And more importantly, what serpent? Some believe it depicts a solar eclipse. Others think it honors a real creature once seen slithering across the landscape. One thing's for sure, this obsession with serpents wasn't random. Let's not even get started on the Australian rainbow serpent, revered in Aboriginal Dreamtime as a creator god, capable of bringing both life and destruction. Or the African legends of Nyami Nyami, the river serpent who protected his people from colonizers and drought. Different continents, different tribes, same image, same reverence. If these are just myths, they're oddly consistent. If not, we're looking at one of the clearest cases of ancient mythological creatures that might have existed being remembered through culture, ritual, and art. So the question remains, were these stories born from coincidence or carved from collective memory? If the serpent is more than a symbol, what did our ancestors really see coiled beneath the surface of the earth? And what if some of them still slither where no light reaches? Eyewitness accounts that defy science. Now here's where things get truly strange. What if people didn't just imagine these creatures? What if they saw them? Throughout history, countless eyewitnesses, from kings and scholars to villagers and warriors, have described encounters with beings that don't match anything in modern biology. Sure, science demands proof, but what happens when enough people say the same thing across centuries? Maybe these weren't hallucinations or myths. Maybe they were real sightings of ancient mythological creatures that might have existed, creatures we simply can't categorize yet. Take Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist who cataloged everything from volcanoes to sea monsters. He wrote of serpents in India so large they could crush elephants. Exaggeration? Possibly. But similar accounts pop up in Chinese, Arabic, and African texts. Even Alexander the Great claimed to have seen enormous dragon-like beasts during his campaigns. Were they all lying? Or were they witnessing something science has yet to catch up with? And it's not just the old world. Indigenous tribes across the Americas have passed down oral histories describing sky beasts, horned giants, and creatures from the deep with glowing eyes and thunderous cries. These tales often include precise details, size, behavior, sound, that remain consistent over generations. In the Amazon, locals still whisper of beasts deep in the forest that no outsider has ever documented. When you hear them talk, it doesn't sound like a fairy tale. It sounds like a warning. Even more chilling are the stories that come with maps and records. Medieval sailors often noted "here be monsters" on their charts, and they meant it. Some drew them, some named them, and some never returned. One example, the Kraken, once dismissed as pure myth, now bears eerie resemblance to the colossal squid, which we only officially confirmed in the 21st century. How many other ancient mythological creatures that might have existed are just waiting for science to catch up? Let's talk about Africa's Congo Basin for a moment. Locals speak of the Mokele-Mbembe, a creature resembling a sauropod dinosaur said to dwell in remote swamp regions. Western explorers dismissed it for decades, until biologists actually found new species of large mammals there, including the okapi, once believed to be a myth itself. If the okapi could go unseen for so long, what else might be hiding in those thick canopies? Even modern eyewitnesses, from deep-sea divers to pilots, continue to report encounters with things that shouldn't exist. But because there's no body or lab specimen, these sightings get brushed aside. The thing is, history has always advanced this way. First comes belief, then ridicule, then discovery. So perhaps the only thing separating myth from reality is time. And if eyewitness accounts point to something real, then maybe ancient mythological creatures that might have existed aren't just echoes of the past. Maybe they're still with us. So if the stories are consistent, if the locations overlap, and if the behaviors described match known species, just twisted or larger, How long before we stop calling them impossible and start calling them undiscovered? And if we've missed them, what else have we overlooked? Cryptids as modern survivors of ancient beasts. What if the creatures of myth never disappeared, just adapted? All over the world, people report sightings of mysterious animals that defy classification. Cryptids. They're dismissed as folklore by many, but what if they're actually remnants of a forgotten era? Beasts that walked with dinosaurs, roamed with early humans, and simply managed to stay hidden. It's a bold thought, but the more you look into it, the more it makes sense. Maybe these cryptids are ancient mythological creatures that might have existed, and still do. Let's start with one of the most famous, Bigfoot. Whether you call it Sasquatch, Yeti, or the Wild Man, cultures across continents have eerily similar legends of massive, hairy humanoids. Ancient Native American tribes revered them as spiritual beings, while Himalayan monks left offerings for them in sacred places. Today, thousands of sightings continue to pour in each year. Are they all hoaxes? Or are we catching glimpses of a species that's mastered the art of staying out of reach? Then there's the Loch Ness Monster. While skeptics laugh, sonar scans of the Scottish lake have revealed massive moving anomalies. Some believe Nessie could be a surviving plesiosaur, an aquatic reptile believed extinct for 65 million years. It sounds wild until you remember the coelacanth, a fish scientists thought had died out with the dinosaurs, until it turned up alive in 1938. If that's possible, why not Nessie? The idea that ancient mythological creatures that might have existed could still swim in our deepest lakes isn't so far-fetched after all. The Congo Basin strikes again with Mokele Mbembe. Yes, it deserves another mention. Described as a long-necked, herbivorous creature, it mirrors exactly how we'd picture a small sauropod. Locals know it, fear it, and avoid the places it's said to inhabit. Expeditions have tried to prove its existence, with strange footprints, broken trees, and eyewitness testimony as breadcrumbs. Is it possible that deep in untouched wilderness, prehistoric life still stirs? And who could forget the Kraken? Once just a sailor's nightmare, now eerily plausible thanks to giant squid discoveries. Some specimens have measured over 40 feet, with eyes the size of dinner plates. They dwell in ocean depths we've barely explored. Makes you wonder what else is lurking in those dark waters. Could some of the maritime monsters seen in the 1600s be ancestors of today's deep-sea giants? Perhaps ancient mythological creatures that might have existed never truly vanished. They just moved deeper. Even in Australia, the legend of the bunyip, a mysterious water dweller, persists among Aboriginal communities. Descriptions vary, but many align with now extinct megafauna. Fossil records confirm that massive semi-aquatic creatures once lived there. So the bunyip may not be imaginary. It could be a cultural memory of real animals passed down through oral tradition, mistaken as myth by outsiders unfamiliar with the land's secrets. The deeper you dive into cryptid lore, the harder it becomes to dismiss all of it as nonsense. Patterns emerge, locations repeat, and biological plausibility creeps in. Maybe these creatures didn't go extinct. Maybe they just slipped beneath the radar. And if we've been brushing shoulders with ancient mythological creatures that might have existed all along, what else might be out there, just beyond the edge of discovery? So, what if they weren't just stories? If even one of these ancient mythological creatures that might have existed was real, what else from mythology might still be hiding, waiting to be discovered? What if the monsters of legend never died? They just moved where we stopped looking. And here's the real question. How much of what you've been taught to ignore is actually the truth? Are we the first civilization to ask these questions, or just the first to forget the answers? Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these creatures do you think actually existed? Or better yet, have you ever seen something that science couldn't explain? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's dig deeper together. And if you want to keep uncovering the lost truths of our world, subscribe to Ancient Chronicles and turn on notifications. Because this is just the beginning, and the myths we've been told might be far more real than we ever imagined.